Terry, we finally made it to this podcast. I did not think it was going to happen. I don't know how many times we both canceled and postponed and all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for being here. Terry Schilling, everyone. That's one of the most English names I think I've had on the show so far. Is that where your family's from?
So I am a total mutt. I'm actually 50% Irish, and then the rest is a mix of English, Scottish, German, Italian, and even some French Canadian. So we got a little bit of everything in there.
So you've got the cold, you've got the alcoholism, you've got the great food, and you've got the big family, like 5 kids, huge family. And that's, I think that's what makes you so wonderful for the job that you're in. One of the things I like to do on the show is not explain other people's jobs and their careers, because I hate it when people do that for me. So please explain to me. So it's the American Principles Project. You guys are literally doing God's work. So please tell everyone at home what you're up to and what the rest of the year and next year holds for you guys.
Well, and thanks so much, Kay, for having me on. And I'm really excited to get to have this conversation. I follow you on Twitter, and you always have, bring that hot fire and increase the interestingness of our conversations online. What I would, just to put it succinctly, what we do at American Principles Project is we give working families a voice in politics. So we organize families in politics to defend their interest, and basically treating the family just like every other special interest group treats their industries, right? So you've got big pharma, big tobacco, big oil, big tech, you got all these bigs. But up until recently, there hasn't been a big family, a robust political arm that gets bad guys unelected, gets good guys elected, and then holds politicians accountable on behalf of the interests of the American family. It's, for decades, and actually probably even centuries in America, we always say that the family is the most important institution in America. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we have a special interest group defending families in their interest? And that's what we're changing. That's we obviously believe that the family is the most important institution, and because of that, it needs a special interest group that's defending its interest in public policy and campaigns and elections. And that's what we're doing. Is we're putting some political muscle behind everyday families and parents who are upset at the direction of their kids' education or the direction of their country. We basically organize families to fight the enemies of the American way of life, as we like to call our enemies.
I think that's, I mean, it's such a noble pursuit. And I know that you and I, we get along well. We have a lot of friends in common. I think there are probably a handful of things that we maybe differ on ideologically, but also the fact that we can kind of come together and have these kind of long, very rich conversations. I think I was working on Joe Pag's show the day that he interviewed you, and that's how I discovered your work. And I just immediately thought, thank goodness someone's finally doing this, because it's like sort of like the 1994 crime bill happened and destroyed a huge subsection of the American family. And now, obviously, I think you and I I think we're both the same generation. And we're sort of seeing the long-term effects of that. You can kind of go back and research the data, research these families, go back anyway. And so I think you're right. Like, there is so much that's collapsing and being ignored and almost devalued the importance of the American family in our kind of sociology, in our social psychology towards the family. I mean, how did you decide that this was your career purpose? Like, was there an aha moment? Is this something you've always been involved with? Like, how do you come up with such a nuanced idea for such an obvious problem? Seems to not be the way that most humans work. So that was, I guess that's my biggest question. It's bloody fascinating.
Yeah, it's very rare when people see a fire or a building on fire that they get the urge to go run inside of it. And that's essentially what we decided to do at American Principles Project with the family is, when you talk about these issues, and just to be totally upfront and direct with everyone, we primarily talk about sexual dysfunction in America. So we're taking on, sorry about that. Okay. So we're taking on all of the most aggressive and anti-American bastions of our culture. We decided we originally got into this from a religious freedom standpoint. We were basically seeing that. Sorry, is everything okay? Because I got a call, and then it seems like everything is all right. We're fine, right?
No,
We can
you're
edit
all
that out.
good. You're all good on mine. If it all goes wrong, I'll go.
Okay.
Yeah. It's because
So
they're watching us.
that's right. So we originally got involved in this fight from a religious freedom standpoint. We were seeing people get fired for opposing gay marriage, or clerks going to jail because they didn't want to issue gay marriage certificates after the Obergefell decision, seeing bakers have their shops shut down and being brought to court. And we were really concerned about, if this whole gay marriage fight, it was, supposedly about liberty and allowing people to pursue their own happiness and pursue their own dreams. And quickly it turned into something that was very coercive, and it was actually ruining the American dream for a lot of people. So we wanted to get involved in that fight. And we actually got involved in the 2016 governor's race in North Carolina. So just to kind of rewind a little bit, after Obergefell, things sped up very quickly when it came to American sexuality, and very quickly it moved into transgenderism and forcing girls to allow boys to enter into their private spaces as long as they claim to be a woman. It was a really weird loophole. So the states across the country started passing what's known as bathroom bills, and to keep boys and men out of women's private spaces. And North Carolina was one of the states that did that. And at the time, they had a governor named Pat McCrory, who was a Republican, who was entrenched in a hard-fought campaign. He signs a bathroom bill into law. And what ended up happening is he told us this whole story after the race. We spent about $500,000 to help him. It wasn't enough. He ended up losing by just under 10,000 votes. A very close election. And he told us a story about how after he signed the bathroom bill into law, Chad Griffin, who at the time was president of the Human Rights Campaign, which is America's largest LGBT lobbying organizations. They're basically the NRA, but for the LGBT movement. They came to his office and met with him. And Chad Griffin said, I just want to let you know, we're going to collect a scalp here. We're coming after you. We're going to get you unelected. We're going to make you the George Wallace of bathroom bills, so that every time a Republican or any governor goes to pass a bathroom bill, they're going to think about you and how you lost your election because you passed a bathroom bill. And for those of your listeners who are young like we are, and just maybe not as nerdy and don't know much about politics, George Wallace was a governor in the South. He was a huge segregationist, and he's basically the example that everyone uses for why segregation was a failed political experiment. So basically they wanted to make women's restrooms and women's showers and locker rooms the next segregation, and eliminate women's ability to practice. But Pat McCrory said something to me that has stuck with me to today. And he said, Terry, I was just so blown away at Chad Griffin and Human Rights Campaign. He said, I wasn't even mad at him. I was actually a little bit impressed. He said, I just thought to myself, we don't have that guy on our team. I want that guy on my team. I want him playing for us and doing this to our enemies. Where is that guy? We don't have that guy. And that was a 7-hour ride, drive from Charlotte, North Carolina, all the way back to DC. And I told my boss, Frank Cannon, I said, I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that goes in to politicians when they're hurting our families. And I want to say, hey, look, I'm so sorry you had to do this, but you're going to pay a political consequence now. We're going to unelect you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But you came for our families, and now we're coming for you. And good luck, because you're going to need it. And that's kind of how the whole evolution of APP becoming the NRA for families came to be.
Wow, that's haunting. I mean, it's incredible that was sort of what spurned you on. I mean, I can see the book, I can see the biopic already, but to think that, because I think that's like the biggest part of the conversation, right, that gets ignored when it comes to things like bathroom bills. And I haven't researched them in any great detail. All I know is that, me personally, I don't want to be able to be accosted in a bathroom. Any woman, I think, that has ever had that happen, been accosted in a bathroom, like when you open the stall, you step out and there's a man in there, it's probably one of the scariest moments of your life. I mean, along with, I moved from Los Angeles actually to North Carolina earlier this year. And one of the main reason actually that I moved was because it is a completely unsafe state for women, because the fact that we've got a severe number of mentally ill, homeless people who are drug addicted, wandering the streets, making it dangerous for women. I was attacked multiple times over many years living there. And I just got to the point where I said, no, I can't put myself in this position anymore. And thankfully I had a very good friend and the owner of a group. Actually, I'm wearing the t-shirt War Party Movement, who came and he drove me across country, because again, I was like, I don't want to drive across. Well, I don't have a driver's license, but that's a whole other story. I'm going to be, all my women friends are going to hate me now, but I'm a woman. I'm a horrible driver. But I didn't want to drive across country alone. And that sense of safety, that's what I think, that's one of the things that I think that we can agree on. I'm sure you wouldn't want your daughters to be in that position either. We all know sort of the story of what happened in Virginia. Was it Virginia or West Virginia? Virginia,
no, it was right? Loudoun County, Virginia. Yep. Loudoun
County. And for those of you who don't know, this is a story about a young boy who wore a skirt to school and used that as his excuse to go and use the women's bathroom. And in 2 different schools, he sexually assaulted two of his peers. And schools did absolutely nothing about it. And I think that kind of aspect of personal safety is just completely ignored. Like the psychology of women is just completely ignored in these contexts. And I even remember when I was in primary school in the UK, there were a couple of girls that I went to primary school, elementary school with, and they were tomboys, which it seems to not be a thing that exists anymore, like as a phrase, like, like girls who like to play sports and things like that. The phrase tomboy has just been completely outlawed. And in a crunch, they would go and use the men's bathrooms. Like I vividly remember that happening. There were 2 different girls who used to do that, and they were just like, yeah, it's like not an issue. But then again, in the UK, I think it was at least at that time, it was a lot safer. We had a much, much greater sense of community, and we had families that raised us proper, as it were.
Right. Well, I think one big thing that gets missed is a lot of these laws that we have, like sex segregated bathrooms and women's private spaces, they were passed to protect women and actually to give them opportunities so that they could enter the workforce, so that they could actually have the same equal opportunities that men have, right? Like no one's really worried about a woman entering the men's restroom and raping a bunch of men, because men on average, and for the vast majority of the time, are a lot stronger than women and can't get overpowered by them. But the same thing goes, that's why we have private spaces for women. We're not really worried about men getting accosted or men getting hurt. We're actually worried about the safety and protection of women. And I mean, I'm not saying that every woman needs to be coddled or protected, but I think it's a good society that builds up institutions and passes policies that protect the most vulnerable and people that are vulnerable to violence and being overpowered. That's just me though. I guess maybe I'm weird.
No, not at all. I mean, I don't know if actually this, but I moved to the United States as like a very liberal socialist person, lived in California, went completely the other way, will never come back. That's what that place does to people who know how to read, which apparently, like Gavin Newsom, anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but apparently Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, doesn't read, as I learned quite recently from Michael Schellenberger. But it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's sort of a haunting reality to think that so many of the laws that were put into place to protect the family and to protect women are being completely disregarded. And the way that pretty much all the women in my life, at least, that I've spoken to about this, phrase it is, we're all powerful women. My mother is a total matriarch. All of the women in my family are very, very strong women, very independent. And I even said on a previous show earlier this year, we were, me and my former co-host were interviewing Aubrey Huff, a former baseball player. And I said, look, I want to have the same rights as any man, but when it comes to picking a partner, why would I choose someone who I might wake up to one day and think, during the apocalypse and think, oh my gosh, you're my food today. you're not the person who's going to go out and get me that food. So, you know, it's a balance, right? You want someone who's caring, who's nurturing, but you also want someone who's going to defend you. And the only women I know personally who are like in favor of, you know, being the man of the house, I mean, they all get cheated on, they all get left. That like, they're not the women who end up in a strong partnership. And it was kind of crazy to me writing, I used to ghostwrite PhD dissertations, and the number of studies that my clients conducted that essentially proved that, like, your rates of divorce quadruple in households where the woman is seen to be the most masculine in the household, to be the one in charge, to be the one wearing the trousers. And I just didn't want that for myself. I didn't want that for my family. You know, I think the statistics speak for themselves. But anyway, I could go off on a tangent about this, and I don't want to, you know, get you in trouble with anyone, because
I love trouble. I will just say, you know, I was raised by very strong women. Like they were in charge, like grandma, great. So I'm the eldest of an eldest of an eldest. So like when I was born, my great grandmother was 62 years old. Wow. And you know, she was the strongest woman I've ever known, and there was no pulling anything over on her. Like what she said went for the whole family. The men listened to her, the men followed her. Like so like, and my mom's very strong as well. So like this whole like feminism thing, it's just always kind of fallen on deaf ears, because in my family, women haven't just been like equal to men. They've kind of been in charge. And it's not like they're domineering or anything. Actually, like they really admire and respect their husbands, and they don't like there's a weird thing with feminism where it's not just about equality or even women being in charge. It's actually about like attacking men. It's almost like there's like in the DNA of feminism, there's almost like a hatred for men. And there's the healthy feminism, and then there's the unhealthy feminism, which I would say that is what that is. But yeah, it's just the whole like feminism thing has just fallen on deaf ears with me, because my whole family has been run by very strong women. You know, it was the women in our family that brought our family from voting like Union Democrats to voting like working class Republicans. Like they brought our family from voting for Jimmy Carter and the Kennedys to voting for Ronald Reagan. You know, so I don't know. It's very odd to me. I love women. I think they're very good. I think that they're very smart. I do not try and pull anything over on my wife. She definitely runs the show. There's nothing, I can't fool her. I've tried. And you know, it's just how it works. Women are typically smarter than men. And once you realize that, you develop a really healthy appreciation for women. You don't look at them as competitors. You look at them as partners. And that's ideally how humanity works. And I think it's, in a weird way, not to get too religious, but I think it's kind of how God designed it, is men and women complement each other. We both bring something to the table that the other doesn't have. And we actually do things that annoy the other half a lot of times, right? But the great compromise is sex and family and children. And, you know, we all want to, you know, for lack of a better word, we all want to get laid. And, you know, so we make this compromise like family and marriage to have children, because that's what happens when you know, have relations. And family is the ultimate compromise. It equalizes the sexes. And I think that's where a lot of our society goes wrong. I think I probably gave both of us enough to get into trouble from that one.
No, I'm thrilled, because, you know, I thought I was screaming into the void for so long. And what you said, like that partnership, that kind of compromise that creates that equality, we have different strengths, we have different weaknesses, and finding that sort of greater purpose and balance, and, you know, doing the work to make a marriage last, to make a relationship fulfilling, that is what kind of balances us out well. And, you know, I have a lot of gay friends. I have a lot of gay people in my well, not a lot, but like I've got gay people in my family, gay couples, and I see the same kind of balance within their relationships. And you know, I don't know if that's like a biological thing or like a personality thing, but it is that balance within roles that can create that longevity. And I couldn't agree more. Like, I think that the feminist movement has gone way too far. And I think anyone who tries to get a leg up over another group. So say like if one group is trying to get a leg up and completely dismiss the idea of equality, like that's not something that I want to be a part of. Like I want that equality. I want us all to be equal in that way and bring our own individual strengths to the table in whatever context. And I mean, I could go off on a rant like for days about women who, one of my biggest pet peeves, and there are ways to kind of get through this. So I just want to preface by saying this, but you know, there's sort of this statistic that goes around that 1 in 3 women will experience an abusive relationship, instead of looking at it as, you know, 1 in 3 men or whatever the statistic is chooses to be an abuser. But the way that I think women have manipulated that situation, and one of my, like, this is what my biggest pet peeve is, I guess, is women who will take their prior abuse and take their prior abusive relationships and bring that into new relationships and perpetuate that kind of cycle. And I think, you know, it causes a lot of destruction within the American family. But anyway, I don't want to get you in trouble by talking about like abusive relationships and all that kind of thing. But I think it is, you know, it's women, if you've been in an abusive relationship, me too, you don't have to live by that definition. Like that's not what all of your relationships are going to be. Stop putting it on all men, because that's not how we create equality. But anyway, going back to your work, because I have so many questions. So, you know, you talk about focusing on politics, which, you know, is probably the most important thing, politics and media, the two biggest influences on our lives in the modern era. Can you kind of describe for the listeners, like examples of kind of work that you've done so far? Because when I look online, you have so much data and so much to read that, like, even in all the times that we've canceled and not been able to get the show done, I still haven't been able to get through it all. And there's a lot of it. And yeah, so please explain some of it for the listeners.
So we have a very simple formula, and it's something actually that a lot of other organizations have followed, mostly on the left, and I think it explains why they've been so successful and why we've started to have some success. But our formula is very simple. Find a policy that is hurting the American people that you can use in campaigns and elections to win on and persuade over voters, run campaign ads on it, and then get your guy elected. And then once you get elected, then you push the legislation to do what you were campaigning on. It's a formula that's been tried and true, and then you hold those politicians accountable. It's a very simple process. So we started off back in 2013, we came out with an autopsy. It was a counter autopsy to the one that was being produced by the Republican Party in America. And the Republican Party was basically arguing that the reason Mitt Romney lost in 2012 was because social issues distracted from their winning economic message. And our autopsy said the exact opposite. We actually said, sorry, but the Republican standard message sucks. It doesn't resonate with voters. And social issues are actually much more popular than any part of the Republican platform. And so we explained what that meant. Well, when you center your whole message around job creators and entrepreneurs and business owners, you are leaving out 95% of the population, which is workers. People that work for a job creator or entrepreneur. So you need a message that resonates with them, but also all of these groups that you're trying to win over, Hispanics, Blacks, women, the youth, they all want to ban abortion at 20 weeks. They all want to keep boys out of girls' sports. They all want to, you know, have a household with a mom and a dad in it. They value this stuff. So why are you attacking that, and why are you tearing down all of that? From there, we started running campaign ads, and our breakout moment was in 2019 with the campaign ads that we produced for the Matt Bevin governor's race in Kentucky. We ran ads on the Equality Act. And most famously, the aspect of the Equality Act that would change Title IX, which is the equal opportunities for women. Basically, the Equality Act would allow for any man at any point to compete against women in sports as long as they claim to be women. And we said it was a total disaster. We tied that to Matt Bevin's opponent, and it was just a track ad. And we just showed exactly what it meant, and gained a lot of traction from it, raised about $600,000 from it. But what we do is we take very simple concepts, very simple persuasive concepts like men and women's sports, like defunding the police, like critical race theory, like what's happening in our kids' schools. and we put them into politics, and we hold politicians accountable based on them. And we target our ads to persuadable voters. We don't go after the base. We don't go after the far left. We go after people in the middle, soft Democrats, soft Republicans, independents, people who are either voting Democratic and can be persuaded, or people who are undecided. And we use these issues to bring them to our side of the table, instead of letting them get fooled time and time again. And Kay, just to be frank, this is very personal for me, because I come from a long line of working class Democrats, Catholic Democrats. And the big thing about Catholic Democrats and working class Democrats is we like our unions, we like our Social Security, we like our Medicare, but we go to church on Sunday, we have a rifle, we have an AR-15, and we don't like killing babies, and we don't like transgendering kids. And along the way, Democrats have been fooling their base. There's still a good portion of Catholic Democrats and working class Democrats who don't know how radical their party is on abortion, on men and women being men and women, on critical race theory, on defunding the police. And so we're going to these Catholic Democrats, these American Democrats, the last remaining American Democrats left, the ones that really support America and the founding fathers and their vision for this country. And we're telling them what's happened to their party, just how radical they've gotten, this is your Democratic Party that your grandfather grew up in, where you voted for Kennedy and you voted for FDR and you even voted for Lyndon B. Johnson. That Democratic Party thinks that men can have babies now. That Democratic Party thinks that the color of your skin actually matters. Well, that Democratic Party has never really gone away. They've always thought that skin color matters. That's why they founded the KKK. But I don't know. So does that make sense? I mean, we go after persuadable voters using these family issues to bring them over to the Republican side of the aisle, because they just don't know how crazy their party's gotten.
No, that makes total sense. I mean, I was driving back from the mountains this weekend, and my parents were like, "Oh, should we listen to a podcast?" And I'm just like, "Okay, we're gonna do some Joe Rogan, and I'm gonna pick some people whose names I'm not gonna say on this show because they'll get me canceled, but the initials were A and J." Anyway, I was like, let's just go to the extreme side of things, and then we'll like wean you back into the middle where sensible folks live. Which it sounds kind of like really you're doing. I mean, it's a very educational platform, and I think it's very necessary, especially since so much of what you're describing is not covered by the mainstream news media, like being able to provide your children with drugs that will completely alter their growth into fully functioning adults. I mean, the sort of example that I gave to a friend recently who was, talking about providing children with hormones and things like that. And I'm like, okay, well, like, say if your kid comes home and like demands to use meth, that's going to like completely alter their brain and their teeth and the way that their body develops. Like, would you let your child sit in a phone booth and chain smoke? Because that's the kind of impact it's going to have on the body. And we don't actually know what the long-term consequences are. And it really surprises me that this isn't being discussed by the mainstream news media, but maybe it shouldn't, because they're scared of sort of touching on these buzzwords that will get them kind of quote unquote canceled. Like the governor of North Carolina, like that whole story that you're describing earlier. I mean, is it mainly niche groups? Like in your research, is it mostly smaller niche groups that kind of push these insane policies, or is it okay, so that gives me a little bit of hope.
Well, I say niche groups, but in reality, there's a whole industry built around the LGBT movement, and it's called Big Pharma and the healthcare industry. A lot of people don't, like, I have a lot of gay friends. They actually, it's funny, my gay friends are the ones that actually gave me the idea for the campaign ads on women's sports. Right.
Wow.
So like even the gays are like, hey, this is weird. Like, why are like the whole transgender thing, that like, how is that even part of this movement? I don't understand how they're related. But yeah, they gave me the idea for the transition ads for kids. And they gave me the idea for the men and women's sports. Like, but to go back to my main point, Big Pharma in our healthcare industry is making a lot of money off of the LGBT movement. One, and the most obviously from the transgender movement, right? In order to be transgender, you have to get these surgeries, you have to get these hormone injections, you have to get these puberty blockers. And Big Pharma is making a ton of money off of it, right? Like this isn't just like, testosterone, which is expensive, by the way. It's not just estrogen. This is like drugs like Lupron, which is a puberty blocking drug that the company, it's called AbbVie. They're a big pharma company. They made $726 million off of Lupron, the puberty blocking drug, in 2019 alone. That was 2 years ago. That was like when the transgender kid mania really was starting to get going.
Yeah.
So they're probably making even more money now, and they can take a small fraction of that $726 million in profit and reinvest it into campaigns and elections to get more people elected that will keep people like us from doing our job and protecting children. There are other drugs that the LGBT movement relies on. There's PrEP, for example. It's like a prophylactic, except for HIV. There's a lot of things that are geared where people are now making money off of this movement. So yes, it's only a small group of really radical activists who actually think sex changes for kids is a good thing. But then there are more established industries now who don't care if it's a good thing. They only care that they're bringing in more and more and more money off of it. And that's actually even more reason to ban sex changes and gender transitions for minors, because it's going to get to the point where you're not going to be able to stop it. And we better try and stop it now before they're making hundreds of billions of dollars off of puberty blockers by forcing all of our kids on puberty blockers.
Yeah, that's kind of horrifying. I can't believe that I didn't put the kind of correlation between Big Pharma, and I think that's, the positive side of my brain. I just couldn't imagine that anyone in their right mind would want to exploit children in that way. And I'm clearly just an idiot. Like when it comes,
no,
you're
it's
a good insane person.
No, so this was the toughest thing for me in moving to DC. So you came from England, and then okay. Wales. I don't know, but
it's all the same.
It is. But I came from the Midwest to DC, and in the Midwest, everyone's pretty nice. Like the level of societal trust is really high. Like you go to the gas station, you're not expecting the gas clerk to screw you over out of your change. You just take your money when you give them, pay for your stuff, and you expect to get the same. But you move to DC, and you quickly learn what the founding fathers in America were talking about when they were worried about corruption, right? Like you're supposed to have trust in your institutions. You're supposed to be able to trust your nightly news. You're supposed to be able to trust big pharma companies to do the right thing. And I don't think anyone's crazy for thinking that, or for not realizing that, people will exploit children to make money. I mean, humanity has fallen everywhere, and it's basically the same old story time and time again. Man doing evil things and then covering it up. We've been sacrificing little children, since humanity came around. Like we've committed Holocaust. Like men do really evil things, and it's really important to remember that when we're setting public policy in place and when we're having these political debates. We shouldn't be. You saw this with the election integrity debates, right? Like when we were talking about rigged and stolen elections, people were actually offering the stupidest arguments, which is essentially, who would do that? Who would steal election? Who would commit voter fraud? Well, I don't know. Like the German people committed the Holocaust. They let that happen. Like if we could do a Holocaust, maybe we could, have people here doing rigged elections and corrupt campaign stuff. Humans do really bad things. And I think it's important to acknowledge that.
I couldn't agree more. Humans do really awful things. I mean, I was living in Los Angeles right at the start of the Me Too movement. And, I grew up in sort of modeling and fashion industry. And, thank God, literally God, that I was never in a position where I felt exploited. I was never in a position where, I was it wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles that I got basically you need to do something for me in order to get this job. And it took 5 other women coming forward and saying like, this guy at this major news and entertainment organization is not a good dude. And thankfully, I didn't want the job in the first place. But I wonder, that was sort of my awakening into all of this. And I wonder for people who have never had to see that kind of corruption, even on an individual level, firsthand. I mean, I assume that they're the ones going, who would do such a thing? And I'm like, for power, I know, mental.
Well, the other irony is, like, if you were to make the accusation, a lot of times these people, if you were to make the accusation against Republicans, they'd be like, oh yeah, well, of course they would do that. They can't win votes any other way. Like, and so they're just like, there's a little bit of partisanship in that, but we just need to, like, retire this whole, like, who would do that? I mean, did you see the guy that drove through the crowd of children in a marching band and a Christmas parade? Like, I mean, maybe that guy would do it. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's like the one thing in the UK when all my British friends are like, oh, well, like guns are terrible, especially after, we just went through the Carl Rittenhouse trial. We got the verdict last week. All my British friends were like up in arms, like, oh my God, how can someone walk into a crowd and like, with a gun and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't have any guns in my property because obviously I'm not an American citizen yet. But like my boyfriend's got his collection and I'm very, very, very proud of that. And so I had to kind of like explain to a lot of my British friends, it's like, I've been in situations where I've heard gunshots going off. And the first thing I do is like dive onto the floor and you just kind of deal with it. It's the reality of living in America. Sometimes that's what happens, especially in California. I'd rather deal with guns than knives, because you got to get real up close to people. And it's so funny if you speak to, I say funny because like my friends who've been stabbed tell the funniest stories about it.
My
they
friends
all survived. Like they're so nonchalant. I'm just like, what? They're like, oh yeah, it's like guy like came up, tried to steal my wallet, stabbed me through the hand, blah blah blah. And I'm just like, oh okay. But every single one of them would say like, I would rather deal with a gun than deal with a knife. And for us, I think as well in the UK and on mainland Europe, I'd rather someone have a gun than have a bomb. And when you don't have guns, people will go to bombs. They will drive into crowds, which is something that happens far too regularly in the UK. Anyway, I could go off and on and on and on about that all day. But let's get back to your work, because something else that you touched upon. Oh, by the way, the only people who drive into crowds in the UK are extremists, and that's all we ever know about them. We never really know their names. I don't know if that's a case of like we try not to provide them with that public martyrdom, or because of the reason that we don't name, or like we're not hearing the name of the guy who did it recently. Because I'm not going to pretend to be able to pronounce the town where it happened because I've only seen it written.
Waukesha.
Okay, cool. Thank you. This is something I do on whenever I read the news for Joe Pags, and it's like, and the event occurred in a state park whose name I can't pronounce, and we're going to move on. But no, he did. He drove into a crowd. It wasn't the SUV that drove into the crowd, as most of the sort of liberal outlets are noting. It was a man. It was a domestic terrorist. But going back to what you said about like, how can, that kind of ignorance of many people where they think, why would anyone do that? How could anyone do that? One of the first things that really shocked me during the last presidential election was the nomination of Joe Biden. I mean, it sort of half did and half didn't shock me, because I was working, or not working, but I was close friends with the leader of it's funny, he was a Republican, but running a Democrat think tank who basically authored the infrastructure bill. And I was like, oh my God, you guys are going to destroy the country. Why? But I was really surprised that the American public went for Joe Biden as a leader, given how woke the country had already become by 2020. And obviously for his role in the 1994 crime bill. And I think obviously that bleeds into, oh, sorry, one of my cats has just jumped on the table, so my video might be wobbling a little bit. But how have you found the sort of long-term consequences of things like the 1994 crime bill? Like, has any of your guys' research shed light on how that has led to the kind of growth in social disobedience? And if so, how do we kind of mitigate further issues related to the sort of Biden administration's ignorance of long-term thinking and ignorance of real-world human behavior? That's a big question. Sorry if that's a lot.
No. It's very interesting. So when it comes to the civil unrest that we have here and the destruction of the American family, which is ultimately at the root of all this, I don't think enough time and attention is paid to that 1994 crime bill. In fact, like I wouldn't be able to tell you how that actually impacted families, which I will be able to do that by the next time we have this conversation, because it's a very interesting aspect to me. And frankly, it's the first time it's been brought up. So congratulations to you on that.
Oh, thank you.
But the destruction of the American family goes back a few decades prior to that. In the late 1960s and early 70s, when America went through LBJ's Great Society. This was a program that was designed to usher in a new era of American progress. It was, they were funding a lot of different projects across the country. It was basically the New Deal on steroids, except this one was a lot more based in social engineering. And one of the biggest problems with LBJ's Great Society programs is that they incentivized broken households, fatherless homes. So what that means is that if you were a single mom and you had a bunch of kids, you'd get a lot more in welfare and taxpayer funding if you didn't have a father in the picture than if you did have a father in the picture. So what ended up happening was these trends started where, if you accept this funding for your family, you are now subject to being visited by social workers, by government social workers. And so they'd get the fathers out of the home for these social visits. Well, then it just started like, you're making the fathers unwelcome in the home. So you create this whole chaos of the broken home and fathers being gone. Fathers are so important. I mean, mothers and fathers are really important because we both instill different children, we both instill different qualities and things into our children. And yeah, you can, cite examples of like, oh, well, what about this situation where the husband was the stay-at-home dad, like whatever, like the rules are the rules, there are exceptions to them. I don't care.
Yeah.
But you look at the out of wedlock birth rate for Blacks and whites prior to Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society program, and they were pretty similar. They definitely weren't anywhere near the 70+% of out of wedlock birth rate that the Black community has today. And those programs did such a number because what happened is they started some generations off without fathers in the home. And then you have new kids being raised in a world without fathers. So that's their new normal. So then they go and start families without fathers. And then they bail on their children because my dad wasn't around and I turned out okay. And you create a cycle of crime, of broken families, of just total chaos and disaster. You have the dysfunctional education system that just is like not even abandoned anymore. It's like, I don't even know what you would say. It's like candy on a wound now. It's actually causing more problems. So the breakdown of the family started, in the late 60s with LBJ and his Great Society program, and we've done nothing to address the errors in those policies ever since. So I don't know. I don't know the way out of this besides just encouraging people to put their families and their children first. Get married before you have a career, have children before you graduate college. Put your family first. You kind of contradict yourself when you say, I want to have a good job first and then I'll start a family. You're putting your career, by doing that, you are already putting your career and your job and your own life ahead of your family's life. It's just really important to have nuance and to have your priorities straight. And it's got to be God, family, country, career. And that's how it has to follow. And right now, it's basically career comes first and family and God comes last, and then it's family, and then it's, anyway, yeah. I could go on.
No, you touch on so many different points. So I didn't know anything about, sorry, what was the name of the Lyndon B. Johnson bill?
It was his Great Society program.
Great
and it was basically, it was basically like FDR's New Deal, except with a lot more social engineering attached to it. So they had Medicare expansion and a Medicaid and a lot of really bad things in there.
Well, I mean, the 1994 crime bill, and I'm sure people will hit me up and say, oh, you missed this, or like, oh, you got this wrong. But the sort of general understanding is what Joe Biden and his cronies, i.e., the Clintons, another reason why I would never, like, I just, I can't vote in this country, but like, I don't understand why anyone would ever support the Clintons ever for like a plethora of reasons. But what the 1994 crime bill did was really perpetuate and almost ingrain that cycle that led to the statistics that you just described, where it's like, upwards of, 74% minority families, it's broken homes. Not as much maybe within Hispanic communities and with Asian communities, especially, well, anyway, I can go on a tangent about that. But what the 1994 crime bill did, really normalize that family separation, but also normalize the pipeline towards civil disobedience, crime. You hear people talk about it all the time when you have, basically our generation of minority children growing up in this country, believing that their options are to be poor, to not go to college, and to likely end up in prison, which is what the 1994 crime bill instilled in so many young American minds. It's a really hard track to get off. And, I think all of us can speak to that sort of like moment in their youth where they first understood the kind of legacy of their family. What is normal within my family? What is normal within my community? How do I want to show up in the world? And we realize that very young. I think that's something that's very underrepresented in our kind of individual psychology. I'm not saying that applies to gender, because it doesn't, in the same way that it doesn't apply to style. Like, it just, once you're over the age of 25, you can do whatever you want. I don't give a shit. But up until that point, but when it comes to understanding your legacy and your purpose and your growth and how you decide to move through your adolescence, what you determine to be right and wrong, the 1994 crime bill really allowed for this huge swath of mostly inner city minority Black Americans to grow up without a father, or to see fathers, uncles, men within their community just be on that pipeline to prison. And so when you keep telling children that that's normal, that's what's going to become part of their life path. And I think it's inherently destructive. And, again, I'm not just saying this sitting here, like, I'm sure people are going to try and call me a racist. And it's just like, well, just look at the data. Like, you can literally just look at the data. And, I've yet to see BLM or any of these major groups kind of really go at Joe Biden, go at the Democratic Party and say, what are you going to do to ensure that this cycle doesn't perpetuate? Because right now, they've essentially legalized crime in states like California that were hit hardest by the crime bill. Anyway, I could go off on a freaking tangent.
Think about the cruelty and the foolishness of what they did there, right? So you have in the late 1960s, they come out with this Great Society program, and they break up the Black family, and they get all these kids born out of wedlock for the next 20, 30 years. And then they decide to pass a law that cracks down on crime and puts a lot of those fathers in homes. So like basically you are in prison, and you basically break up the remaining homes that you have of guys sticking around and actually trying to put food on the table. Like, you can't write it more perfectly. Yeah. I mean, the Democratic Party seems a little bit sadistic, and both times, Lyndon B. Johnson, when he was passing his Great Society program, he was very racist. I mean, he said the N-word all the time, and he said something along the lines of, after we pass this, I'm going to have every N-word voting Democratic from here to kingdom come. That's what he said. And then the Clintons they're destroying the Black family in America, weakening them, and destroying them so that they can have political power for the rest of their lives. And then Bill Clinton comes around, passes the 94 crime bill, destroying the Black community even more. Why? So that he can have more political power and get reelected for the presidency in 96. Like, these are really bad people. They should never have power ever again. I don't know how much clearer it can be.
Yeah.
that Democrats are unfit for power. They're unfit for really any elected office. I don't care if it's dog catcher. I wouldn't trust a Democrat around my dog. Let's
Yeah.
just put it that way.
No, I couldn't agree more. How are you doing on time, by the way? Can I
Um,
keep you for another couple of minutes?
yeah, we got time.
Cool.
I had this blocked until 5.
Yes. Okay, dope. Because this is fascinating as well, especially for me, because like most of the conversations I have are with brilliant people, but they're doing things that I think, like even when I have, like had Raheem on the show, it's basically just me
Mhm.
and him being British. Like I had like Jack Posobiec on the show, and it's just Jack talking about Catholicism and the end of the world. Um,
Uh-huh.
and no, because I think what you do is so required and applies to like there is no demographic that your work doesn't apply to, and I think
Yes.
that's really beautiful. And I think it's something that's been really forgotten in modern culture. Like we're just told so frequently to separate, identify yourself in this like very unique way, or sorry, unique way. Things are either unique or they're not. But I
That's
think
right.
I think what you're doing is so niche and so specific, yet so broad and so all encompassing. And especially since, as you described, it sounds like you grew up in, I mean, I don't want to get into like your family, like, like your arguments and all that kind of stuff. But like me, no family is perfect, but I grew up in a pretty damn perfect family. And
Mhm.
being able to sort of see that and want that for others and not just completely disregard the agonies of others because you're happy is, I think, something that, again, I've yet to see the Democrats truly do, because what they do is they look for their own power. They're not letting people flood in across the border because they think it's a human and kind thing to do. They're doing it so that they can bring in all these new people who they're going to like hopefully, like they're going to hope that those people then vote for them, because they're going to think, oh, Trump tried to build a wall, Biden let us in, completely ignoring the fact that pretty much every woman and every child that comes across that border will be a victim of, sexual assault. Like children are being put on birth control as young as, 9, 10, 11, 12 before they even start making the journey up through, Central America to come to the United States. All the Democrats are thinking is, oh, how does this help me? And that's not what your work is doing. Your work is
Mhm.
really helping the American family. So let me see, because I got so many questions.
Well, we
Um,
can keep talking. We can keep talking. I mean, I don't know what I have after 5, but um, let me just say this. I really appreciate you saying that, because that's actually, it's a conversation I've had before, but not publicly, which is why we're really doing this. I've had it a lot of times with my wife, and we're weird. Like when you compare us to the rest of our generation, what my wife and I did by getting married at 23 and 24 is very odd. Our generation doesn't do that. Our generation bought this lie that all you have to do is go to college, get a good degree, and then you can have a family from there, and then you're going to get a great job, and everything's going to be great, and you're going to be so happy. Well, that's not been the case for my
yeah,
generation. My
no.
generation's miserable, and they don't even know why anymore, right? Like we used to know, oh, well, that person's not happy because they chose a life of drugs and recreation, and now it's like you can't really say, oh, well, that person's unhappy because they have a college degree. When in reality, the person's unhappy not because they have a college degree, but because they spent 7 years getting a master's degree. They're $250,000 worth of debt. They can't find anyone to marry them because they don't have a job where they can support a family. And, there's a lot of reasons. And ultimately, my wife and I have talked a lot about this. Like, if you just focus on the basics first, right? If you focus on getting married and prioritizing your wife and then prioritizing your children, everything else is going to fall into place, right? Because like there's this thing called nature, and
Mhm.
nature is very strong. And nature tells a father when he gets his wife pregnant to protect her and to provide for her, to go out and make more money. And yes, there are some exceptions to that rule, but when I look at guys like my father, he was 22 years old when he got my mom pregnant with me, and he didn't have a college degree. he just worked really hard, and he was smart, and he was good with his money. He was disciplined. He didn't go out drinking. Well, he did go out drinking a lot. He was a recovering alcoholic. So,
Okay.
but he didn't waste his money on video games, right? Like all of his money went into, like, this is really cool. So I was very close to my dad before he passed, and he used to make ends meet. So they lived in a trailer at first, and he made enough money, saved it up. He bought a duplex. He'd rent out half of the duplex. It would cover the mortgage for both sides of the duplex. From there, he still needed extra money on the side. So what we started doing was buying cars that were in really bad condition and then flipping them and making like 250, 500 bucks every weekend off of that. He was just entrepreneurial. He was creative. And why was he creative? Was he creative because he wanted to make his mark on society or make a name for himself? No, he loved his kids. He loved his wife. He didn't want to be embarrassed by being a father who couldn't provide for his family. He was willing to do any and everything he could to make sure that we had what we needed to be happy and have what we needed to live. And that's the energy I'm trying to tap into here, right? Like we all have that animal inside of us. We all have that basic human instinct to provide for our families. And moms have the same damn thing. That's why these single moms are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet for their kids. Your kids are everything. Your family is everything. And when you put that first, you'll get the college degree, right? Like you'll get that good paying job. You'll ask for a pay raise. You'll work harder. You'll do better. You'll think long term. You'll make it. I mean, I don't make enough money to invest any money or put money away. I mean,
No, me.
I have so many damn kids. But maybe one of them will be a millionaire, right? And they'll let me live in their mansion when I'm ready to retire. But no, it's just very simple. And I feel bad for my generation. I think that not only are they missing out on, having a lifelong partner where their whole life is dedicated to, but they're also missing out on children. Like, I know it's cliche, right? Like you hear all the time, but I just want to like, if I could slap every one of your audience members in the face, just like lightly, just to get their attention, I'd do it right now. And I'd say this, listen to me. Your kids are everything. They are the perfect combination of you and your spouse. Like it's 50-50, right? Like they look like you, they talk like you. And if they don't look like or talk like you, they look like and talk like your spouse. And that's even more attractive in a certain way. Like you love your children. You're obsessed with them. They destroy your house. They spend all your money, but you want to keep doing it. You want to keep having kids. Like I'm so enthralled with my kids. Like when I talk to my daughter about, for example, my daughter has a friend, and the friend's very overbearing, and the friend is always making her do things that she doesn't want to do. Well, we were at a party, and my daughter's like crying, and I come up to her, I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, she's trying to make me do this, and I don't want to. I'm like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Ever since I had that conversation with her, she's now like empowered. Like she doesn't want to do anything that she doesn't want to do anymore. She's very vocal about it. Like, it's just weird. I don't know how else to describe it besides like each kid's different. Each kid that you have is going to impact the world in infinite and immeasurable ways, right? Like my daughter Grace, she's going to be someone's spouse someday. She's going to be someone's mom. She could be someone's teacher. She could be someone's, best friend. Like these kids go on and impact the world in immeasurable ways that we won't even know. My daughter Grace could end up saving someone's life from suicide someday. So saving someone's life from a car accident someday. Like you just don't know. And so my wife and I have embraced a really simple philosophy: just let God determine who comes into this world and who leaves. And things are working out pretty well. I mean, I'm madly in love with my wife. I'm madly in love with my children. They make my world, and I'm willing to do anything for my family. I don't care about myself as much. Like if it was just me, I'd be playing video games all the time. I'd probably be drinking a lot more. I don't know. I don't really play video games anymore because I have kids. I do play video games with them, but I don't, not like I used to,
No, oh my gosh. Sorry.
I don't know if that makes sense, right? Like
it
kids
really does.
are everything. And when you take care of that, when you have kids in your life, you're willing and ready to do anything you have to do to provide for them. It makes you a more responsible person, makes you a better person, makes you more loving. And in a weird way, it helps you understand humanity in a lot better fashion. Like you learn that human beings are fallen, right? Like everyone will say like, you hear this about the whole racism debate, like children have to be taught racism. Nah, children are assholes. Like children are pretty bigoted and prejudiced. Like children will judge you by wearing glasses, right? Children look at you
Yeah.
wearing a stupid shirt and they're like, "Oh, I don't like that guy. He's wearing a stupid shirt." Like, don't talk to people in stupid shirts. Like the, like children are assholes, and they actually have to be trained to not be assholes. And that's what we do as parents. Is like we train them to be decent, respectable members of society. And so anyway, I don't know. You just learn so much. You grow so much as a parent, and I want my generation to experience that. That was a really long diatribe to just cut it to a simple point. Like, get married, have babies, protect your family, and provide for them, and your life will be infinitely better than if you are never married, never children, and living for yourself. Climb a million mountains. It's never going to match the experience of holding your baby, your own flesh and blood, for the first time. There's no comparison. And I've climbed a lot of mountains. I've done a lot of great things, and nothing compares to when you hold your baby for the first time and get to sing to it and get to hold its hand and touch its feet and kiss it. Like there's nothing comparable to it.
I'm gonna clip that whole bit because I think everyone needs to listen to it, because it's something that, you know, anyone who knows me well knows that I would have had kids. You know, it's gonna sound crazy. I wish I'd had kids when I was a teenager. I really do. So I look at my friends who did have kids when they were teenagers, and I'm like, wow, they're way happier, way more successful, and they have way more fun than me. And I was 22 when it it's so crazy. I was lying on the floor on like outside on the ground. I have a thing with sleeping outside. I love doing it. But I was sleeping on the ground outside in Hawaii with my boyfriend at the time. And this was a little bit after I'd sort of come to my relationship with God, maybe a couple of years later. And it just hit me like all at once. I was like, shit, I really want like loads of kids. And there was nothing specific, like nothing happened. I didn't see a shooting star. I wasn't like, you know, around children. It just hit me out of nowhere. Like, oh my goodness, that's what I was put on this planet to do. And that was, you know, 6 years ago now. And I'm glad that I didn't have children with my previous partners. They weren't good people, and they wouldn't have been good to my children. Their parents also weren't good people. There's a lot of dysfunction, a lot of like nastiness. And so, you know, and I've always sort of been in that position where it's just like, I'll just look out, you know, like I moved to a country on the other side of the world completely alone when I was like 21, and I would have moved here sooner if, you know, uni hadn't got in the way, like university. I can figure out the rest of it. But you'd be amazed, maybe you wouldn't be, by the number of women, not just from our generation, but from older generations, who are like, oh, you've got plenty of time. And I'm like, show me a woman over the age of, say, 35, 38, who's had a safe pregnancy, had a completely problemless child. And when I say a problemless child, like obviously there's no, like children aren't problems, but a child with like full health, full mental faculties. And show me a woman who has gone through IVF and hasn't subsequently developed all sorts of nasty cancers, like 10, even 15, 20 years later, that you can stem back to those sort of like just something that's you're doing to your body that's not natural. And I hate to say it, but like, show me a woman that hasn't had kids. And I'm whispering this so people tune it out if they're listening in their car. But like, you can tell women who haven't had their own children or who haven't had children. Because like I also know a lot of women who have adopted babies and adopted very young children who I think are incredible mothers because they haven't been able to have kids themselves. And, you know, if it came down to it, that's what I would do. I would adopt before I went through IVF. But we're not celebrated for that. There's no round of applause for women who choose to have families. It's like from like, especially on the left. And that's, I think, something that a lot of young women aren't exposed to anymore. And we're told, like, you're so right. We're told like, oh, go have like a super, like one of my best friends, his last relationship broke up. He was like, I will provide everything to this woman. She can do everything that she wants, but I want to get married and have kids. And she was like, no, I want to be a CEO at some BS company. And I'm just like, she's gonna die alone. She's just gonna die alone, mate. Like, just let it be. Just let her die alone. And
So
it's harmful. Yeah.
it's so bad. And I had this enlightening conversation with my mother about 3 or 4 years ago. And so I'm the eldest of 10 kids, right? And I'm having this conversation with my mom.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh, she's
like,
a saint.
oh, she's no, just for raising me, she's a saint. I mean, everything I put her through, we're definitely getting her to heaven. All 10 of us, like, we're doing everything we can to put her through as much stress and grief as possible. So she's got no baggage.
She'll live forever. Yeah.
Totally purified, purgatory on earth. But she had this conversation with me when she was realizing that she wouldn't be able to have any more kids. And she's going through that phase, and she says, Terry, I'm just kind of depressed. I feel like God is taking an ability away from me. I'm like, well, Mom, you definitely didn't let that ability go to waste. You got 10 kids, and you did it, like, you did really well. And she said, I know that, and I've come to grips to it. And then she said, but then I started to feel sad for all of these women who were young, and they adopted this lie and believed it. And that is that they should have kids. That they should have careers and go to college during their fertile years when it's easiest to have a kid, and then they can start having kids after they turn 38. She said, I can go back to the workforce now. I had all my kids between 19 and 45, and now I can go back into the workforce. I can go get a college degree if I want to. I can start the coffee shop I always wanted to. I can help your dad open another pizza restaurant. I have so many options right now that for work that I could do whatever I want. And I could have chosen the career instead of having all of you guys. I said, well, thank you very much for that. And we really loved having you around. But like, that was really eye-opening for me because, to have a mother of 10 kids, one, say that she wished she could have had more, that's a really selfless person, right?
I was gonna say.
It's just, but like, that's really wise. And you don't learn, and think about this. She had 10 kids, right? So like, I run a business, or I run an operation. You give me a mom of 10 kids, I'm hiring her because she's got organization skills, she's got management skills, she's got to have focus, she's got to have drive, she's got to have ambition. Like, a mom of 10 kids is nothing. Yeah, you're working with me, you need a lot of patience, that's for sure. But like, you develop skills, and you're exactly right. We don't, but it's not, I wish it was as nice as like, and I know you probably didn't do this on purpose. I wish it was as nice as just, not giving women as much credit who work inside the home and raise children. It's actually worse than that. We denigrate those women. We attack them. We call them housewives as like a pejorative. Really, we should be like elevating those women. Look, I've hired a lot of women. I've hired a lot of men. I like hiring women just because they're usually more focused, they're more disciplined, they're more thoughtful, they're more empathetic. They think about things, down the road. They don't just like, they think about step 1, step 2, and step 3. So they complete their thoughts more. Whereas like guys are just like, get this off my plate. Women in a lot of ways are better workers than men are. And I think, I don't know how, like, I haven't wordsmithed this very much, but women are better workers, which is kind of why, like, it's a good thing that they raise children a lot of times. Like, we can use women in the workforce after they have kids, but like if you were to ask me what's more important, raising children or writing press releases for Amazon and people like Jeff Bezos, I think raising the next generation of Americans is just a little bit more important than making Jeff Bezos even more money, or even putting another plaque on the wall or whatever. Like, this is your flesh and blood. It's the future generation. It's whether or not we're going to even have a country in the future. You want to end global warming? Have another baby and then teach that baby, to be more aware of their carbon footprint. Like, this is how you change the world. So like, I'm very optimistic about America and the world because there are people out there like me who are having a lot of kids, and it's going to be us who are the voters in just a few generations with all of our boatload of kids. Like, people were like, we shouldn't let children vote. The Democrats are crazy. Like, no, let children vote. Like, let them vote. Like, you're going to win the family vote. Like, let children vote, because my kids are all voting Republican, and that's 7 votes for the Republican Party. And how much is the pink-haired, purple-haired, transgender activist going to be, polling in? Not very many. So I don't know. I don't know where we were going with that. I have ADD, so a lot of times my conversations go way off track. Hope I didn't get you in trouble there.
I mean, yeah, no, not at all. Like, this is great. Why I always say, like, the show tries to be like, mates down at the pub having a drink. Which again is something that I do with my dad. And we were talking about it like before the show started. Like, me and my dad do not align politically anymore. Like, he'll even go out of his way to like say stuff. Like, we were just up in the Smokies and he'll see like, a certain banner or something like that, and he'll just like, yeah, dickhead. And like, he knows that I'm just sat there just like, I completely disagree with everything you just said. Like, that's really insulting. And then he'll like put on his mask and I'm just like, you sheep. Like, we love each other though. Like, we're best friends. Right. And my dad, kind of like your dad, my dad, he didn't and probably won't ever stop drinking. But again, I think there's a line where it starts to like preserve your body after it starts to, and I'm really sorry that I'm never going to be able to meet your dad, because he sounds like he's a really, really, really wonderful man. I mean, clearly
you guys would have gone along really well. You really would have gone along really well with him. He was really funny, loved to play practical. If you like Raheem, you would like my dad. He's similar, not as. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, I'm not gonna make it, but yeah, same bloke, same type of guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think it's important, right? My dad didn't go. My parents actually had me pretty late. My mom basically, the sort of like the running joke, and she hates when I talk about her on the show. It's so funny.
What's her name?
Her name's Elizabeth. No. Same name as the Queen. No, we'll be like, or if we're in a bad mood, we call her Lizzie, and then she flips a table. No, she, like, my parents were married when they were quite young, when they were 25 and 27. And my dad really didn't want kids. Like, he was just like, he didn't want to do it because he sent away to boarding school when he was a child. He was really close with his mom. We're still like, she died before I was born, still very close with my grandfather. But family stuff. And like, I would never send my kids to boarding school. Let's just put it that way. But so he was not really in a position where he thought that, I don't think he thought that he would be a good father. And then when my mom got pregnant with me, she was, she's never said this out now, but she, I think, was like, he's going to leave. He would never in a million years do that, And so she kind of told him on his birthday, like, surprise, I'm pregnant, kind of thing. And he apparently didn't talk for like a week and a half. And then the first thing that he did was he went back to school and he got his degree, and he held an incredible career working actually in sort of social services as a probation officer. Like, I sort of credit my love of people to him. The difference is he liked to work with people, and I like to work for people far away from them. And so he spent up until he retired pretty young, pretty much when I went to university. He was like, well, you're the only reason that I got a job in the first place. And he always went out of his way, even when we would argue, or if I would come home upset about something in school, he would kind of push me to see any situation from the other person's perspective. And it's all those like little nuance aspects of child rearing where, I hope I'm sure I'm going to be a terrible parent when I do become a parent, and I'll think everything that I do is wrong. But I hope that I at least pass on that aspect of behavior that I would, I was taught from my dad to the next generations of the sort of Smythe family, or whatever the surname ends up being. Certainly won't be Smythe. It's a horror. I hate it. I gotta spell it every time. Everyone gets it wrong. But
I actually got it right. I was texting Raheem before the show, and I'm like, is it K Smith or K Smythe? And he's like, Smythe. I'm like, yes. I figured. I don't know.
Oh, cool. Anyway. Well, it's the English in you. Thank you, mate. Even though I'm Welsh, not English, like Raheem. But no, I think, it's the kind of beauty, right? Like, the things that you don't realize that you're going to love. And like, me and my dad are best friends. Like, I really couldn't ask for a better father. I often, say, like, if you want to come live with me, you can come live with me. I'd be fine with that. And it's it's strange because so many of my friends were raised with that mentality of, you know, leave school, go to university, almost like one of the things that I came to really hate, that a lot of my friends back in the UK, you know, a very socialist, very liberal country. And maybe you can shed some light on why this is. And, you know, maybe we've even talked about it before today and I'm just being an idiot. But one of my friends recently got pregnant and, you know, it was all planned. And she had, I guess it was a little while ago, so I won't give away her identity or anything, but she had an abortion when she was younger. And I'm one of the only women I know who's never had to have never even had to contemplate it, because, you know, we have an amazing safe sex education in the UK. And I was always very conscious of that. I always looked at any partner I had, I was like, oh my gosh, this person might end up being the father of a child. I need to be incredibly conscious of this. And that's not maybe something we're necessarily taught, but it's something that helped me have a certain amount of control and not have to go through that. And so when my friend got pregnant, one of our other friends kind of messaged in the group chat, like, oh, isn't it funny how like eventually you get to a place where a child is a blessing? And I had to leave the chat because because I want kids so badly. I was just like, I just can't believe that anyone would think any other way. And I mean, that kind of shame that goes along with having children young, even having children out of wedlock, but with a partner. Oh, my internet connection is unstable. That's not good. I hope I don't lose you. But tell me if I'm wrong, but does that come from the Democrat side too? You know, with the expansion of things like Planned Parenthood, and would that or would that not also stem from big pharma? I now realize. I don't know.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about how, like, you know, there's industries now that are, you know, making tons of profit. People's jobs and livelihoods now depend on it, with like the transgender movement, right? Like all these big pharma companies are making tons of money and people are getting paid, and now they're reinvesting that money into politics and protecting their interests in legislation and policy. It's the same thing for the abortion industry. I don't look, we might disagree. When it comes to abortion, I don't view the mom as the bad guy. In fact, I view her as like another victim, just as like the as the baby is a victim of abortion. I think that the moms in 99.9% of cases are also the victim. And I think what's happening is you have these rich doctors who are actually really shitty doctors in the first place, right? Like if you're doing abortions, you aren't good enough to do heart surgery. That's essentially how it works. It's like it's the lowest on the totem pole for doctors.
I never thought of it like that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like who wants to kill babies for a living? I mean, they all know like we're sucking baby body parts out with a vacuum. Like you have to be a really terrible doctor and a sick individual on top of that to make your money and livelihood off of that. So I think that there's an industry around this, and I think that it's like old men who are doctors who are taking advantage of these women who are poor, usually in really bad abusive relationships. A lot of them are sex trafficked. And, I mean, sold into sex slavery is the more accurate term. A lot of them just don't think they can handle it. Like no woman wants to actually kill her baby, especially her firstborn. Like it's just so against nature. When you get pregnant, even if it's out of wedlock, there's still like a fight or flight mentality where you want to like do everything you can to protect that baby. So like there's a lot of studies that have shown that women that do get the abortion, they've already basically compartmentalized that, and the baby's dead to them already. Like in their head, it's not a baby, it's dead, it doesn't exist, and they're just basically getting an organ removed that they don't want in them. So really what's happening is Planned Parenthood in America anyway has set up a whole, and America's healthcare system is totally different than the UK's. I don't think I need to go into that, but like we actually make profits off of our healthcare here. And so Planned Parenthood makes a lot of money. So what they do, it's brilliant. So Planned Parenthood is basically in every single public school in the country. They're the ones in charge of sex education. They're the ones teaching about birth control and condoms. It's where a lot of kids will go to get birth control, go to get condoms, go to get anything they need sex related. They go to Planned Parenthood. And then when that contraception fails and they get pregnant, where do they go? Do they go to their parents that they didn't feel comfortable with in the first place getting the birth control with? Or do they go back to Planned Parenthood to get the abortion? They go back to Planned Parenthood to get the abortion, and the parents don't ever even know. So like Planned Parenthood has this really sick business model where they take these poor, scared, helpless women who think there's no other options for them after their birth control. It's a future customers model, really, with what they've done here in America. It's really terrible. They're making a ton of money off of it. The abortion industry is over $1 billion a year. I mean, it's a lot of money being put into that here. At least in the UK, they're not like, profiting off of that. There's not, I mean, I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't comment on UK's situation with abortion. I don't know enough, but it's really bad here. It's not good. It's not ideal.
That's that's really horrifying. Yeah, I had a friend once who was like, you don't have to get me a birthday present. You can just make a donation to Planned Parenthood. And I was just like, I'm going to go out on your birthday with other people. I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't like gone there for free care, but nothing, I just didn't know that it was like $400 to go and like just stand in a room with another type of doctor back in LA. But again, it's the for-profit system, right? The Brit in me was like, or rather the Welsh in me was like, what is the cheapest option? That's when my brain goes. But yeah, it's really horrifying how these systems have kind of become so indoctrinated and ingrained into like cyclical behavior, and how these businesses have trained so many different ways of thinking in order to push that kind of for-profit model, where they've created sort of social norms out of something that's not very socially normal. And it hasn't been socially normal for pretty much our entire existence as a species up until the last 30, 40, 50 years. I think that's another thing that humans aren't great at, is looking at sort of our existence on this planet further back than sort of like, even if, I'm in my late 20s, I think you said you're in your early 30s, like we forget how different things were in the 90s because we're so normalized to what things are like today. Like I have to keep reminding myself that we used to use a landline and things like that. But I think it plays into so many larger aspects of our behavior. And so again, that's why I think that the work that you're doing is so important, because it's taking these macro, not social norms, and these kind of policies that will have a very long-term consequence on our behavior as individuals, not just for ourselves, but for our families and for one another, and for the sort of sanctity and future of this country. And sort of stopping them before they become norms. And I think that's really inspiring, even if, we do agree and disagree on a lot of different things, or certain aspects on maybe like a personal level. I don't actually think we disagree all that much, really, when it comes down to it. And I think that's really cool. I mean, sort of like, I know we sort of got to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask, like, if you could, in your perfect world, sort of look at the long-term consequences of your work right now and say, look, sort of like 25, 30, 50 years into the future, how do you want children born, today, in the last 5 years, in the next sort of 5-10 years, how do you want their lives to look? Like, how do you want their future to look if you do your job, how you envision it?
So if I do my job right, with the next generation, their first, they'll go to a school and they'll learn the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic, their nation's history, world history. They'll learn how lucky they are to be born in this great American country. They'll go to church on Sunday. They'll value the blessings that God has given us, including our rights that He's granted us with. They'll be taught that family is everything. Family's at the end of your life, you're either going to be surrounded by your family members or you're going to be dying alone. They're going to understand that men are men and women are women, and there's nothing wrong with either of those two things, right? They're going to respect their wives. They're going to cherish their daughters, and the women are going to cherish their husbands and value what they bring to the table. And they'll craft really good, empathetic, hardworking, brave, and courageous sons as well. From a more direct standpoint, though, I'd like, for a kid's, or at least a human being's, first sexual experience to be with another human being, not a computer screen. I think that porn has hurt us a lot. I think that it's kind of separated the great thing about sex, which is the physical compatibility aspect and the physical intimacy. So I think that I don't know, it's tough. Like, gosh, that's a crazy question. So like, being normal, getting educated, having knowing how to think critically, questioning everything, getting married, valuing your fellow citizens, valuing your partners, valuing who you are as a human being, not thinking that your biological sex is an illness that needs to be cured, not thinking that children and pregnancy is an illness that needs to be cured, but being grateful for everything that God gives you, your country, your family, your children, your rights. I guess it's just overall a greater gratitude to God, and everything that He gives you, and embracing it, and not just like tolerating His blessings, but like really maximizing them, right? Like, don't just have one kid and be thankful that God gave you one kid. Keep going. Don't stop. Just being open to life, embracing life. It's hard for me to take the left seriously when they talk about protecting the most vulnerable. Like, you won't even have kids. Like, what do you care about future generations? You don't have any skin in the game in the next 50, 100 years. You're going to be dead. You really want me to think that you're so virtuous and noble that you care about the Earth's temperature changing and rising? You're not going to be here. So what do you care? It's my kids that are going to inherit this. So I don't know. I guess a greater appreciation for family, greater love for country, greater appreciation for all the gifts that God gives you, and like, just like loving your family and having kids. And I don't know, that's just the crazy world that I want to grow up in, or I want my kids and my grandkids to grow up in, is it's a world where you love your God, your family, and your country, and your career is a means of supporting all of that other stuff that's more important.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And that's really, again, just really beautifully put. And it's so funny because I get called a hypocrite all the time, just like, well, you don't have kids, you don't have a husband, like, you work. And I'm like, yeah, as soon as I don't have to, I'm not gonna. Like,
that's the big irony, right? Like, what I will tell you is, I think that's, I don't know. I overheard a argument a few months ago between a guy and a girl, and the girl's a little bit older. She's like 34, 33. She was getting married, and the guy was like talking about like how women just have the wrong priorities and they don't prioritize family formation. And the girl's like, well, I mean, I tried to get married for quite some time, but I couldn't find a good guy. And he was like, well, you just didn't try hard enough. It's like, no. Like, guys are kind of assholes. Like, we've done our own part to like not help out with this marriage situation. I mean, like, at the end of the day, like, I think it's odd for women to pursue men. Like, fine, go ahead, do it. It's weird, but like, as the guy, like, I like being on the pursuit of my wife. Like, I like trying to get her to re-fall in love with me every day, and I have to do that because I piss her off all the time. But
how did you guys meet?
I don't know. We met on the campaign trail. Actually, we met at CPAC in 2007, and then we worked a campaign together, and then we worked another campaign together. And I don't know. I think a lot of it falls on men and the attacks on masculinity. Like, we attack masculinity as if it's really bad in America, and we get our kids, like our young men, addicted to video games and porn. Like, there's a reason they're coming after Josh Hawley for bitching about video games and porn with young men. It's because like, it's a huge industry for them, and they don't want a bunch of men to stop buying their video games, or stop buying their weed, or stop buying their online porn subscriptions. Like, it really is a threat. And I think men are just as much to blame as women are.
I'm gonna definitely use that as an excuse the next time I I get into an argument, definitely. No,
Yeah,
it's
say
just,
no,
it's
no
just
guys asked me yet.
no.
All these guys are addicted to porn. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a huge issue. I mean, like after living in LA, like the unrealistic expectations of men and women was
Mhm.
laughable. I think I've talked about it 1,000 times on this show. Like I had one girlfriend who one day was like, so here's my list of everything I want in my perfect partner. And like personality didn't even come into it. Like it literally didn't come into it. Like her feelings towards him, you know, how he would like make her feel. It was all about like height and cars and career and income and all this kind of stuff. And you know, I've asked a couple of men back in LA similar things, and you know, sort of similar responses. And then I started working in conservative news media. And I think the last person I asked this of was I'm going to call him out actually on it because it was so lovely, but it was Bobby Barack from Outkick. I don't know if you've ever read his column.
I haven't met him yet. Yeah.
Oh, you gotta meet Bobby. He's such a like he's younger than me. He get like every time we talk, my faith in humanity is restored.
That's cool.
Really terrific writer, terrific analyst, and just terrific human being, really. Like we send each other like discount codes all the time, which I appreciate from anyone. But no, I asked him, and one of the things, you know, after, you know, happiness, support, that was the biggest one, was support, you know. Like he's got very specific ideas about what he wants out of life, as I do, in terms of lifestyle rather than career. And he was just like, I just want someone who's going to love me and support me unconditionally. And I was just like, yeah, that's the, you know, not that there's like a right answer, but that should be in every right answer. And that was something that I found was missing from pretty much every answer I got from every other millennial in LA. They were beautiful people, don't get me wrong. Like, they're all stunningly beautiful people, but my God, there was nothing beneath that. And it was sad, really. And, you know, like, I get it quite a lot. Like, I get told that I dress like a commie, and I'm fine with that. I like my commie clothes. Anyway, Terry, thank you so much for this today. We're going to have to do it again. I mean, anything you want to come on and talk about, this is just so much fun. But where can people find you? What kind of stuff are you working on right now that people can get involved with? Not just, you know, the project as a whole, but like, do you have any niche areas that you're specifically working on at this moment in time?
Well, everything right now that we're focused on is the 22 midterms. We need to take back the House, the Senate. We need to take back the governorships in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those are three key states. You know, just to put it out there, those are three very important states to make sure that we have election integrity. And those governors there right now are not doing anything to make sure that happens. So we're focused on the midterms. We want to win back the governorships in those three states. We want to take back the House, take back the Senate, and then start holding politicians accountable and hopefully chalk up a big win in 2024. So the best way to help us out is to join our big family. It's our membership program. It's the big family. You know, we want bigger families, but we also want a big, powerful, strong special interest group in Washington, D.C. representing families and fighting on their behalf. And so you all can be a part of that. It's just savethefamily.app, and we'll get you signed up. It's $25 a year. I mean, your Netflix is a lot more than that. So sign up. We'll actually do some good with it. And if anyone wants to follow me on any of those social media platforms, from Getter to Twitter to Instagram, it's all just Schilling, SCHILLING 1776. And you'll find me anywhere.
Perfect. And I will be putting links to everything in the description. So if you're listening to this legally and not like streaming it from somewhere, which, you know, why would you do that, man? Like, why would you do that? Then everything is in the description. I highly recommend going and following Terry on all platforms. I'm so thrilled that we met. I love that we're part of I don't think people realize how close knit our community actually really is. All the different people that we know, like everyone seems to know everyone. It's a very small world. So thank you for
Yep.
making such a big difference in it, Terry. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me. We're coming on.